The wind roared across Denver City Park like a creature made of teeth and ice. Snow came down in hard, blinding sheets, erasing sidewalks, trees, even sound. The world was white and furious, and only one figure moved through it, step by heavy step. Nathan Reed pulled his coat tighter around him, though it did little to stop the cold from crawling into his bones. He had walked this path for 10 winters, always at night, always alone. The storm didn't matter. The cold didn't matter. Nothing really did, not since the day the world took his wife, Laura, and the child they never got to meet. People in Denver admired him, envied him even. A billionaire who built satellites and rockets, a man whose signature could change the entire direction of technology. They had no idea he came out to the park each night not to think but to forget, to drown memory under snow and silence, to lose himself where no one could reach him. But tonight the silence broke. It came soft at first. He thought it was the wind shifting, the groan of branches, or maybe distant traffic. But then it came again, thin, trembling, desperate. A child crying. Nathan stopped. The storm swallowed sound so fast it was almost unbelievable that anything could break through it. He stood still, listening, breath fogging in sharp white bursts. There again. A weak sob carried across the frozen night like a thread pulling at his chest. He could have ignored it. Anyone else might have. The storm was dangerous. Visibility nearly gone. He could barely see the path beneath his boots. There was every reason to turn back, return to the warmth of the mansion that waited like a tomb on the hill. But the sound didn't just echo in the air, it echoed in him. Something old, something wounded, something he had buried so deep he thought it could never rise again. He stepped off the path. Snow swallowed him to the knees. His boots slid on hidden ice. The wind slapped tears from his eyes. He could feel his heartbeat in his teeth. But the crying grew clearer. Not one voice now, more. A chorus of fear. He pushed past a line of snow-heavy pines, each branch groaning under winter's weight. And then his gloved hand brushed something soft and unmoving in the drift. A mitten. Nathan's breath shattered in his chest. He dropped to his knees, brushing snow aside with frantic urgency. A small shape emerged. Then another. And another. 4 little bodies curled together beneath a park bench, trying to become small enough to survive. The oldest was a girl, maybe 7. Her face pale, lips blue, arms wrapped around a tiny boy who wheezed for breath. Next to them, 2 smaller children, a pair of twins, huddled close, their eyes half-lidded with cold. When the girl saw him, her gaze sharpened, not with fear, but with the quiet strength of someone who has already seen too much. "He can't breathe," she whispered over the storm, pointing to the boy in her lap. "Please, please help him." Nathan's hands shook as he stripped off his gloves and pressed his fingers to the child's neck. The pulse was there, but faint, fading. "You're freezing," he said, voice raw. "We need to get you out of here, now." The girl swallowed, snow clinging to her lashes. "My name is Sophie," her voice broke. "I didn't know who else to trust." Nathan looked into her eyes and felt something shift, something old and aching and alive. "My name is Nathan," he said, "and I promise I'm going to keep you safe." He lifted the small boy into his arms. The other 3 clung to his coat as he rose, guiding them through the storm, step by step, toward the faint glow of headlights in the white distance. But as they moved, Sophie looked back once, toward the trees, the dark, the cold, as if something else had been watching them, as if the storm itself had not been the most dangerous thing waiting there. The drive back to Cherry Creek felt like moving through a dream made of white noise. Snow battered the windshield in frantic bursts, each gust threatening to erase the world completely. Nathan kept one hand on the wheel, the other gripping the small boy against his chest, feeling the faint rise and fall of struggling breaths. Heat blasted through the car vents, fogging the windows, wrapping the children in a cocoon of warmth they hadn't felt in God knows how long. Sophie sat beside him in the passenger seat, though she barely reached the headrest. Her spine was straight, her chin lifted, her small hands carefully holding the twins close on either side of her. Not crying, not asking questions. Watching everything, like someone who had learned long ago that safety was something you had to evaluate, not assume. Nathan glanced at her. "You were very brave," he said quietly. She shrugged, though the movement trembled. "I just couldn't let them be cold. They're my family." The word family hit him somewhere deep, a place he didn't visit, a place he avoided. He cleared his throat. "You did everything right." She nodded slowly, as if filing the information away. "Are you alone?" she asked. The question was simple. The ache behind it was not. "Yes," he answered. "For a while now." The car rolled past blacked-out streetlights and silent houses. The storm had knocked out half the grid. The city lay hushed and dim, like it was holding its breath. When the iron gates to Nathan's estate finally swung open, the SUV's headlights illuminated a mansion standing tall and cold against the night. Hundreds of windows, all dark. The children stared at it as if it were a castle no one was meant to enter. Inside, warmth hit instantly. Radiant heat from the floor vents, the faint scent of cedar polish, walls stretching high and silent around them. The children stepped forward slowly, unsure whether to trust warmth after so much cold. Nathan moved quickly, laying the little boy, Ben, on a velvet chaise near the fire. He grabbed blankets from the cabinet, wrapped each child one by one. Ella, the more curious twin, reached a small hand toward the chandelier above them. Her eyes wide as sparks of crystal caught the firelight. "It's like the stars live here," she whispered. Evan, her quieter mirror, leaned into Sophie, needing nothing but presence. Nathan stirred the fire with clumsy urgency, though he had not used it in years. Sparks leapt, flames caught. Warmth bloomed. The house, so long still, seemed to inhale. Sophie stepped forward, her voice almost too soft to hear. "This place is quiet," she said. "It has been," he replied. She looked around as though sensing something beneath the silence, something resting, waiting. "It doesn't feel empty," she murmured. "Just sleeping." Nathan froze, not at her words, but at the sound that slipped into the room at that exact moment. A soft melody. Faint. Familiar. A lullaby. The blood in his veins seemed to turn to ice. The sound drifted from down the long hallway, past the grand piano, Laura once touched but never mastered, past the staircase that creaked only on rainy nights, past the memory-scattered walls. He hadn't heard that song in 10 years. Sophie's eyes lifted to his. "Do you hear it?" Nathan's throat tightened. He nodded once. He knew exactly where the sound came from, a room with a blue door. A door he had locked the day his world shattered. He hadn't opened it since. Yet now, it was open, just slightly, just enough for a line of blue light to spill across the floor. The music played on, delicate and steady, as though someone unseen, were winding the key. Nathan took one step forward. Sophie took his hand, and together they walked toward the nursery. The hallway felt longer than it ever had, like the house itself was stretching time, forcing every step to be deliberate. The blue door at the end stood slightly ajar, a thin stripe of soft light spilling across the polished floorboards. The lullaby floated out, gentle and steady, the same 4 notes rising, 4 falling, like a heartbeat remembered. Sophie's hand was small in Nathan's, but her grip was firm. Not afraid, anchored. Ben, wrapped in blankets, stirred where he lay near the fire, as if the music tugged at him from across the house. Ella and Evan clung to each other, silent, wide-eyed. The warmth from the fire should have calmed them, but the song carried something deeper than memory. Something searching. Nathan exhaled slowly before pushing the door open. The nursery was exactly as he had left it 10 years ago. The pale yellow walls painted by Laura's careful hands, the white crib with the tiny carved stars on its frame, a mobile of wooden birds hanging above it, still turning slightly as if breath touched it. The rocking chair where Laura used to sit when she spoke to the baby they never got to hold. Everything untouched, everything preserved. A room built for a life that never arrived. His heart pulled painfully in his chest. On the shelf near the rocking chair, The small silver music box gleamed softly. He remembered buying it for Laura on a rainy afternoon. She had chosen it because the song felt like hope. But no one had touched it since she died. And yet it was open. The key inside it slowly unwinding itself, though no hand turned it. Ben had followed now, clutching his own dented music box, the one engraved with the same initials. L.R. Nathan's breath stilled. Sophie looked from one music box to the other, her eyes widening, not with fear, but with understanding. "She used to be here," she whispered. "Didn't she?" Nathan could only nod. Sophie stepped forward, her gaze tender in a way children should never have to learn. "She loved a baby," she said. "And the baby didn't come. And you were alone after. And the house got quiet." Her words were not guesses. They were a truth she simply felt. Nathan sank to one knee, unable to speak. For a moment, grief returned so sharply he thought it might crush him all over again. Then something else happened. The wind outside howled, and a sudden gust slammed into the window. The lights flickered, once, twice, then steadied. Ella gasped softly and pointed toward the rocking chair. It had moved. Just slightly. Just enough to creak. A chair meant to hold someone who never came. Now rocking in an empty room? Sophie didn't step back. She didn't cling to him. She simply watched, steady and quiet. "She's not here to scare you," she whispered. "She's checking." Nathan swallowed hard, his vision blurring. "Checking what?" he managed. Sophie turned and looked directly into his eyes, a calmness settling over her like she had known this answer her whole life. "If you're still living," she said, "or just waiting." The lullaby faded slowly, the final notes soft as snow. Nathan leaned forward, placing his hand on the crib's railing. The wood was cold, still, real. He closed his eyes. "I'm trying," he whispered, voice breaking in the quiet. "I just don't know how anymore." Sophie didn't move closer, but her presence was enough. "You saved us," she said softly. "Maybe that's how." For the first time in years, Nathan stood without feeling the crushing weight of memory pressing him down. He looked around the nursery, not as a grave of what could have been, but as something else. A beginning. The music box stopped. The room fell silent. The house didn't feel haunted. It felt like it had exhaled. Nathan turned to the children, the cold storm now only distant wind against the windows. "We're going to keep you warm," he said, voice steady at last. "And tomorrow, we'll figure out everything else." Sophie nodded once. But as they stepped back into the hallway, leaving the nursery behind, the rocking chair gave one final, soft creak, as if someone was still sitting there, watching, waiting, hoping for what came next. Morning arrived gently, as if the storm had grown tired and finally laid itself to sleep across the city. Pale winter sunlight filtered through the tall windows, turning the frost on the glass to glitter. For the first time in years, the Reed mansion did not wake to silence. It woke to small voices, soft footsteps, cautious laughter. Life returning step by slow step. Nathan had always moved through the kitchen like a ghost, grabbing coffee and nothing more. But today, he found himself rummaging through cabinets he hadn't opened in a decade. The copper pot still polished. The cocoa mix Laura used to buy from a specialty shop downtown. The recipe she once scribbled on a scrap of paper and stuck to the fridge with a smiling sun magnet. He remembered every measurement. Sophie sat at the island, hair messy from sleep, wrapped in a blanket too big for her. She watched him with a quiet attentiveness, chin resting in her hand. Ben sat beside her, legs swinging, tracing patterns in the condensation on his mug. Ella wandered the kitchen with curious hands, her fingers brushing marble, brass, daisy-patterned tile. Evan leaned against the warm stove, his eyes still shy but softer than last night. Nathan set 4 mugs before them. Thick, warm sweet. The kind of cocoa that held you from the inside. The first sip hit them like sunrise. Ella giggled, an actual bubbling sound that bounced off the kitchen walls. Ben's eyes widened in surprise. Evan closed his eyes and let the warmth sink into him. Sophie looked at the mug for a long moment before whispering, This tastes like something safe. Nathan didn't realize he was smiling until he felt his own face soften. Breakfast followed. Or something like it. Toast slightly burnt, eggs uneven. Ella accidentally dropped a spoon and Ben tried to catch it midair and nearly knocked over the whole plate. Evan laughed, a small, startled laugh, and Sophie blinked like no one had heard that sound before. The house noticed. It didn't creak with emptiness anymore. It hummed, subtle but alive. Mrs. Davis arrived mid-morning, bundled against the cold. She had served Nathan's family for years and had watched grief hollow him out like winter carving a tree. When she walked into the kitchen and saw 4 children sitting at the island and Nathan actually sitting with them, her breath caught. "Oh. Oh my," she whispered, pressing a hand to her chest. Ella waved enthusiastically with a toast crumb stuck to her cheek. Ben nodded politely. Evan hid behind Sophie. Sophie simply said with a level child's dignity, "We're staying for a little while. Just until we figure things out." Mrs. Davis looked at Nathan. Truly looked at him, and her eyes softened in a way only someone who had stayed through every dark year could. "It's about time," she murmured. The day unfolded slowly. The children explored the house not like tourists, but like people testing whether a place might choose them back. Ben found the library first, drawn to the shelves like gravity. He traced the golden lettering on the spines, mouth half open in wonder. A book of constellations lay open on the table, left there years ago by a man who once tried to understand the sky instead of his own heart. Ben climbed into the leather chair, legs dangling, and whispered, "Do you know the stars have names?" Nathan, standing at the doorway, nodded, "Yes, and stories." Ben smiled, small and real. Ella discovered the sunroom, glass walls and winter gardens hidden beneath sheets of frost. She pressed her forehead to the window, fogging the glass with her breath. "Can we make a snowman later?" she asked. Nathan didn't even hesitate. "Yes, we can." Evan drifted toward the piano. He didn't touch it, just rested a hand near the keys, like you might greet something sacred. When he finally pressed one note, it rang pure and warm, filling the house all the way to the ceiling. Sophie didn't explore. She watched. She studied Nathan the way a lighthouse might watch the sea. Steady, patient, waiting for the next wave. When he caught her gaze, she didn't look away. "You don't have to be alone anymore," she said quietly. He swallowed, something thick rising in his chest. "Neither do you," he replied. "You said—" The day softened into evening. A fire glowed, blankets piled on couches. Mrs. Davis hummed while chopping vegetables. Nathan read aloud from the constellation book, and the children leaned closer, drawn to stories older than storms, older than pain. And for a moment, just a moment, the house was exactly what it had once been meant to be. A home prepared for love, not loss. Outside, the snow continued to fall. But inside, warmth took root, slow and quiet and unstoppable. Nathan did not know what tomorrow would bring. But tonight, the house breathed, and so did he. Winter settled slowly over Denver, but inside Nathan Reed's mansion, a different kind of season was taking hold. One made of laughter echoing down long hallways, of tiny socks scattered across, carpets once kept pristine, of music warming the air instead of silence choking it. Days turned into weeks, and the 4 children began to fit into the house the way sunlight fits through a window, naturally, gently, without force. Nathan found himself waking earlier each morning, not to run from memory, but to meet the sound of Sophie practicing the same piano notes again and again, determined to make them smoother. Ben would already be awake, building something out of spare parts Nathan had ordered on a whim, small gears, wires, pieces of model rocket kits that littered the table. Ella painted the windows with washable paint, turning every pane of glass into a world of color. And Evan simply walked from room to room with his violin tucked under his chin, playing soft notes like whispers. The house, once so cold and still, now breathed like a living thing. But the world beyond its walls was not so welcoming. Word spread. A billionaire taking in 4 shelter children. 4 children, without names anyone recognized, without history anyone could trace neatly on paper. Neighbors began to whisper. The press began to circle. Some called it charity. Some called it loneliness. Some called it a scandal waiting to happen. The loudest voice came from directly across the street, Calvin Shore. Calvin was the kind of man who ironed his socks and labeled his refrigerator shelves. He chaired the neighborhood association with the dedication of someone guarding a fortress. And Nathan's home, once quiet, controlled, inconspicuous, was now full of life. Noise, color, children. Calvin did not do chaos. One afternoon, Nathan was helping the twins carve snowy tunnels in the backyard when he heard his name sharply. "Reed!" Nathan turned to see Calvin standing stiffly at the iron fence, hands shoved deep into expensive leather gloves, face pinched with disapproval. "We need to talk," Calvin said, in a tone that suggested there would be no talking, only judging. Nathan wiped snow from his coat and walked toward him calmly. Ella and Evan pressed themselves behind him, peeking around his coat. Calvin's eyes flickered to the children, his lips thinning. "I'll be direct," Calvin began. "People in the neighborhood are concerned." "About what?" Nathan asked, voice even. Calvin gestured broadly toward the mansion. "This situation, 4 shelter children, reporters showing up at the gate, disruptions, questions about stability. People are wondering if this is appropriate." Nathan felt something cold stir inside him. Not fear, not shame, anger, quiet, steady anger. "They're children," he said. "Lost, freezing, alone. I brought them somewhere safe." Calvin gave a thin, practiced smile. "Yes, of course. But perhaps they belong somewhere, more structured, with trained care. Not in the home of a man who—" He stopped himself, but the implication hung in the air. Who lost his wife? Who shut down? Who stopped living? Nathan took a step closer, and for the first time, Calvin stepped back. "They belong with me," Nathan said quietly, "and they're not going anywhere." That evening, Nathan found a note slipped under his gate. No signature, no handwriting, typed on plain paper. "You can't bring ghosts back." The words hit like a fist, not because they were cruel, but because they were familiar. Someone had been watching. Someone who knew. Nathan folded the note and slid it into his coat pocket, saying nothing. Later that night, after the children were asleep, he walked into the nursery again. Not to mourn, but to breathe. The room didn't hurt anymore. It felt waiting. Sophie appeared quietly in the doorway. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. She simply walked to his side and rested her head against his arm, as if she had known him for years, not weeks. "You're scared," she said softly. Nathan closed his eyes. "Yes." "So are we," she whispered. "But we still stay." The house settled around them. The storm outside was quiet now, but a storm was coming. One that would not be made of snow. It happened on a Tuesday morning, the kind that should have been ordinary. The kitchen smelled of cinnamon and toast. Ella was humming while she tried to braid Sophie's hair, badly. Evan was tuning his tiny violin, plucking each string like checking the heartbeat of something delicate. Ben sat cross-legged on the counter, building a rocket engine out of Lego bricks and real screws he probably wasn't supposed to have. Nathan stood at the stove, spatula in hand, watching pancake batter bubble. He felt content, a feeling so unfamiliar it almost frightened him. Then the world broke. It started as a vibration, his phone buzzing on the counter. Then another, a rapid-fire series of alerts, calls, notifications, messages, the digital storm before the real one. the kitchen suddenly filled with the faint echo of headlines shouting through screens. Nathan frowned and reached for the phone. At first, he didn't understand what he was seeing. His name across every news banner, his company's logo, words heavy as stone. Nathan Reed under federal investigation, allegations of embezzlement and fraud, CEO accused of hiding funds through private foundation. He read the headlines 3 times before his vision caught up to the meaning. Someone was accusing him of stealing from the very research foundation he and Laura built together, making it look like the children he brought home were part of a distraction, a publicity cover, a performance. His stomach twisted. Grace Walters, his attorney, arrived within the hour. She came in fast, her hair full of wind and her coat still half-buttoned, her eyes sharp and burning with a truth she didn't want to deliver. "Nathan," she said as soon as he opened the door, "your accounts are frozen. They've halted your corporate access, and—" She hesitated. "And?" he forced out. "They flagged the adoption petition. It's on hold." It felt like a floor collapsing gently beneath his feet. Quiet. Devastating. Sophie stood halfway down the stairs, watching. She had heard every word. "What does that mean?" she asked. Grace was careful, but not gentle. She knew children who had survived storms understood more than adults assumed. "It means the state needs to review whether this home is still safe and stable," she said. Ella's paint-smeared hands clutched Evan. Ben set down his rocket piece by piece, as if afraid it might shatter. Nathan's voice came out steady, but only because something inside him had gone still. "They won't take you," he said. "No thunder. No drama, just truth." Sophie stepped forward, chin lifting the way it did when she refused to be small. "Are they saying you're bad?" she asked. Nathan knelt so he was eye to eye with her. "They're saying something happened," he said, "but they don't know the truth yet." Sophie nodded once, a soldier's nod, a survivor's nod. "We know," she whispered. That night, another storm hit Denver. Sheets of ice against the windows, wind howling through the trees like memory returning to life. The house went dark. The power flickered once, twice, then vanished. Flashlights were fetched, candles lit, the fireplace whisked into flame. The children huddled close, quiet, tense, waiting for the dark to swallow something. Then, from upstairs, came the music. That lullaby, the same soft, impossible lullaby from the nursery, playing in the dark, unwound, unafraid. Sophie's hand found Nathan's, small but unshaking. "She knows you're scared," she whispered. Nathan didn't ask who. He already knew. The house was not haunted by loss anymore. It was haunted by love that refused to leave. The storm raged through the night, but its howling faded by morning, replaced by something heavier. Silence. A quiet so taut it felt like the house itself was waiting for a verdict. Nathan barely slept. He sat in the study, staring at stacks of documents Grace had brought over, his hands motionless on top of them. Not because he didn't trust the process, but because he remembered what it felt like to lose everything once. He couldn't do it again. When the children woke, the house moved differently. Even Ella didn't run across the hallway. Ben didn't crack jokes. Evan's violin stayed closed in its case. And Sophie watched Nathan like a lighthouse watches ships lost in the dark. By noon, it came. An email. The subject line was short, almost unremarkable. "My confession." The sender, Julian Cross, Nathan's former chief financial officer. A man who had vanished when the investigation began. Nathan clicked. The confession unfolded in paragraphs so detailed and undeniable that they felt like a blade, freeing a captive from ropes. Julian admitted to everything. Redirecting funds, falsifying records, setting up false accounts. The scheme had been carefully woven, not to enrich Julian, but to destroy Nathan. Out of jealousy, out of greed, out of the belief that a man who had lost once could be broken again, but the part that struck hardest was the end. I saw the news about the children. I thought I could live with what I did. But I can't watch you lose the only chance at a family you've had in 10 years. I won't be the reason those kids get taken from you. Attached were transaction logs, signed authorizations, dates, times, enough evidence to end the investigation in a single breath. Grace read the email twice, then again. Her voice broke on the exhale. This clears everything. Nathan, everything. I'll take it straight to the committee. She was out the door before he could speak. Then came the waiting. Hours that felt like years. The children sat in the living room, gathered around him as if they too understood that sometimes the quiet before a decision is louder than any storm. The doorbell rang at twilight. Nathan opened it to Grace, eyes shining, breath unsteady, a folder in her hands. "It's done," she whispered. The committee reviewed the evidence. The accusations are dropped. And she opened the folder. Papers. Official. Signed. You are now, legally and permanently, their father. Nathan didn't move at first. The world didn't rush. It didn't explode, it simply softened. Sophie was the first to stand. She stepped forward, hands trembling not from fear, but from release. "You have to sign," she said, voice thin as breath. "That makes it real." Nathan reached for the pen. His hand shook once. Then steadied, he signed his name, Nathan Reed. Father. Ella screamed and jumped into his arms. Ben laughed, real laughter, full and bright. Evan covered his face and cried quietly into Sophie's shoulder, and Sophie. She didn't rush him, she didn't collapse. She simply walked to him, placed her forehead against his chest and said softly, "We're home now." Nathan wrapped his arms around all of them, all four, and felt the weight he had carried for 10 years finally lift. In the nursery upstairs, the music box began to play again. Not slow or haunting this time, but warm, steady, live, not a ghost, not grief, a blessing. Laura's lullaby filled the house like light breaking through clouds, as if she had been waiting all this time not to be remembered. But to see him choose life again, the house didn't just breathe now, it sang. 5 years slipped by the way snow melts into spring, quietly, imperceptibly, until one day everything is different, and you realize the world has thawed while you were simply living in it. The Reed mansion no longer resembled the silent monument of grief it once was. Warm light spilled from its windows in the evenings. Music drifted through hallways. Paintings, Ella's paintings, covered once bare walls in bursts of wild color. There were scuff marks on the floors, smudged fingerprints on the banister, a chip in the kitchen counter from where Ben accidentally dropped a metal rocket engine. Nathan left the chip there on purpose. He liked reminders of life. He stood now in the kitchen, hair more silver than gray, wearing flour on his shirt because Sophie insisted today's breakfast be pancakes shaped like constellations. Her fingers were longer now, her posture taller, her eyes wiser in a way that had always been beyond her years. She played piano every morning, and the house woke gently to her music instead of silence. Ben sat at the dining table surrounded by blueprints and notebooks, sketching something with intense focus. He was 11 now, still curious, still patient, still the boy who once traced patterns on countertops to feel less afraid. Except now he knew his place in the world. Nathan made sure of that. Ella sat on the carpet near the fireplace, covered in paint up to her elbows, lost in her canvas as though the world poured through her brush instead of her hands. She was pure sunlight, loud, bright, untamed, a reminder that joy can be louder than sorrow. Evan tuned his violin nearby, fingers graceful and sure. His music had changed too, no longer fragile, no longer quiet like someone apologizing for taking up space. His notes filled the room fully now, as if he had learned he was allowed to be heard. Nathan poured coffee as Sophie flipped a star-shaped pancake with exaggerated seriousness. "You missed," Ella observed. Sophie huffed. "It's abstract astronomy." Ben didn't look up from his sketch. That means you messed up, but you want it to sound intentional. Evan's violin let out a single soft laugh of a note. Nathan leaned on the counter, letting the moment sink into him. He had once walked through these rooms like a ghost. Now he stood in them like a man who had finally come home. Later that evening, after dinner and after laughter and after the soft chaos of bedtime routines, the house fell into a quiet that felt warm instead of empty. Nathan found himself drifting to the nursery, not because it hurt, but because it didn't anymore. The door stood open now. Always open. The crib had been replaced with a cushioned reading nook. Books filled the shelves where once only silence lived. The music boxes sat side by side on the windowsill, their silver surfaces reflecting the dim amber glow of the hallway light. He picked up Laura's music box. Turning the key gently, the lullaby began, not sorrowful, not haunting, but soft, familiar, steady. Footsteps approached. Sophie, now 12, stood in the doorway, wrapped in a blanket. "You're thinking about her," she said. He nodded. "Yes, always." Sophie stepped beside him, resting her head against his arm, a gesture she had once given him on the first night he thought he might lose everything. "She's happy, you know," Sophie whispered. "Because you didn't stop." Nathan closed his eyes. The boy he once was, the man broken beneath a blizzard of grief, would not have believed this moment could exist. He opened his eyes again to the sound of the music box. Snow began to fall outside, slow and gentle. A new winter beginning. But this time it didn't feel like loss. It felt like a promise. Nathan placed the music box back on the shelf, right beside the second one, the one carried through a storm by a small boy holding on to hope he didn't yet understand. He whispered, "Soft enough that only memory could hear it. We made it. Laura, we found our sunrise." In the quiet, the house breathed, not alone, never again. Winter had returned to Denver, soft and quiet this time, the kind of winter that made the world feel like it was wrapped in a wool blanket. The Reed mansion glowed warmly against the snow, its windows lit like lanterns welcoming travelers home. Nathan was in the sunroom, repairing one of Ben's earliest rocket prototypes. Not because Ben needed help now. He built real engines, not toys, but because Nathan liked remembering who Ben had been when he first arrived. Small, shivering, hopeful, just like the others. Sophie walked in, taller now, her hair tied back, a sketchbook tucked under her arm. She paused when she saw the old rocket in Nathan's hands. "You kept it," she said. Nathan smiled. "Some things are worth keeping, even when they don't work anymore." Sophie didn't answer. She simply sat beside him, her shoulder touching his. They stayed that way for a while, comfortable in silence. Then she spoke, voice quiet but sure. "I want to know where we came from." Nathan didn't move. He had expected this someday. He had prepared, feared, hoped. "Not to leave," Sophie said quickly. "Just to understand." Nathan nodded slowly. "I understand." He led her upstairs, not to the nursery, but to the small room beside it, once a storage room, now a quiet corner full of old boxes and forgotten things. He knelt and opened a wooden trunk he hadn't touched in years, not because it hurt, but because some truths wait until the heart is ready. Inside were documents, shelter intake reports, medical notes, a tattered backpack Sophie had once guarded like a shield, and beneath all of it, a letter, folded carefully, yellowed at the edges. Written in a hand Nathan recognized immediately, Laura's handwriting. Sophie looked at him, confused. "This is yours?" Nathan shook his head, voice soft. "It's yours." Her hands trembled as she opened it. The letter was dated 10 years before the night he found them in the snow. "If someone finds this, please know I am donating these music boxes to shelters, hospitals, and foster homes. If even one child finds comfort in them, then my love will continue, even if I cannot. If a child carries this music, let them know they are not forgotten. Let them know they are meant to be loved." It was signed. Laura Reed. Sophie stared at the signature a long time, tears gathering but not falling. So, we didn't come into your life by accident, she whispered. Nathan exhaled, slow and full, as if releasing 10 winters all at once. No, he said. You came because love finds its way. Even through storms, even across years. Sophie closed her eyes. And this time the tears did fall, but they were soft. Quiet, grateful things downstairs. The familiar lullaby began to play. Not from the nursery, but from the music box Sophie had carried all these years. She didn't wind it. She simply held it, and it played. She looked up at Nathan, understanding washing over her like sunrise warming snow. Your wife found us, she said. Nathan's voice broke when he answered. No, sweetheart, he whispered. She brought you home. Sophie leaned into him, not because she needed comfort, but because love sometimes requires two hearts to hold the same moment. Outside, snow continued falling softly. Not a storm, not a warning, a blessing.